We are the tribe from the north, we're brave and we're bold. Defeating our rivals never gets old. Making our way to the Big Sky Conference. Watch out, 'cause here comes the silver and gold. Whoa, whoa. This is Tubbs at the Club for the Vandals of Idaho.
Welcome back, Tribe from the North, Brave and Bold, to the official, unofficial podcast of your Idaho Vandals in the Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. So we made it not even through the intro, and Marten has sprinted towards amateur hour. Man, just having the weeks off is killing us, but he's already here. Marten, you're having a good time.
Yep.
For listeners who may have missed something, why are you dying right now?
Dallas decided to do a little jolty shock face, and it caught me off guard.
Oh, for the love of God! So it was an amateur hour duo. And speaking of which, the second half of that duo
is Patrick listening right now, because Patrick seems to be always the guy clipping things. Now we've got Brian muttering "motherfucker," "Jesus Christ," and I don't even remember what that one was, but it was really good. We just need to pull that again.
You know, if you're new. The first guy who talked is Marten. He's a producer. The second guy who talked is Dallas. He's a co-host. We're done introing because everyone else knows who we are. We're now at 3 minutes of dicking around. This is an episode that I'm pretty stoked about because we have something a lot of other places don't have anywhere near in relation to Big Sky Media Day, which took place on Monday, July 25th. By the way, I'm Brian Marceau. So we're going to jump right into Around the Bar, guys. Brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. We have a 21-minute interview between me and Jason Eck at Media Day. Just so you guys know, Media Day itself, it's all conducted in one big room. So there's 10 coaches plus all the media figures plus administrators. In short, there's a lot of stuff going on in one room. So the sound quality is a little bit different than what you're used to out of Tubbs at the Club. Jason Eck comes across absolutely fine. My voice comes across a little softer. Listeners, what you're going to have to do is just listen to Jason Eck because he gives answers. You can tell the question. If you can't hear what I said, you can tell what question I asked based off what Coach Jason Eck says. If you are watching, Marten is going to bring up a paraphrased version of the question on screen. So without further ado, again, Around the Bar brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. Marten, I'm ready to throw it to myself on Monday interviewing Jason Eck, unless you or Dallas want to speak one more piece of context before we start.
I will add quick context. Again, if you are listening and you cannot understand what Brian is saying, we have captioned or pseudo-captioned all of his questions. So if you're listening to a podcast right now and 30 seconds from now you're like, I can't understand a word Brian is saying, come pull up the YouTube video. We do have it captioned so you at least understand the questions before X starts answering them. And with that, we bring you Jason Eck.
All right, head coach Jason Eck here, Big Sky Media Day. So, Jason, everything's new, of course, with the new head coach. A question a lot of people are interested in right now. In the spring, you guys signed Javoria Gibbs.
Yes.
Transferred over from South Dakota State. First question, health-wise, have you gotten to see him in practice at all since he transferred over?
I've been able to see him in some individual drills where he's working with Coach Schleissner and then running and lifting in the weight room. We can't watch him when they're out throwing 7-on-7 and things like that, but he's doing that. He's in good health. He's working as hard as I've ever seen him work, and I think he's doing a really good job.
Some mobility-wise, compared to when you of course coached him as offensive coordinator at South Dakota State. How does he look compared to when you saw him pre-injuries?
I think he looks as good as ever. I think anytime the guy's had a couple injuries like that, you hold your breath a little bit and stuff with things. But he's a good athlete. He's not. Lamar Jackson's not his game. He wasn't quite the athlete maybe as like Mark Gronowski was. Who was our quarterback. After him in the 2020 season. But he's a solid athlete and throws it very well, very strong arm. So it's going to be It's going to be unique, quarterback competition. CJ is such a great athlete. He's probably the fastest and the biggest and the strongest. You watch him when they're running sprints all summer. He's leading, the group every time. And Jabori's got a strong arm. I think Jabori has a really good demeanor for a quarterback. He's very even keeled. And then Giovanni's, he's got kind of that moxie you want in a quarterback. I think he's a really good leader. I think he's confident. I think he's does a lot of little details right. So it's going to be a good battle, and we got to do a good job as a staff sorting it out quickly. It's like presidential elections. You got to call stuff. You can't wait till if you wait till all the ballots are in, then you didn't get enough reps for the guy who's going to start against Washington State. So we got to do a good job of projecting the race early and getting a lot of reps, and then starting to funnel it to the guy who's going to be our starter as camp goes on.
You've talked about it a little bit. Like our listeners they've seen CJ play at least some. Yeah. We've seen Giovanni play at least some. Can you give a little bit of description about if Jabori is the guy, not that he is, but if he were to become the guy, could you talk a little bit about, or could you describe what kind of player as a quarterback he is?
Yeah, he's played, quite a bit. He played very well against Minnesota. We played them in 2019, the season opener. Again, I think he delivers the ball well. He can, do some things running the ball. He had a long run against Youngstown State when we beat them in 2019. He stands in the pocket well, delivers the ball, very strong arm. I think he can make every throw. The first drive against North Dakota State, when it was him versus Trey Lance, and they were both freshmen. That was a big game in 19 when College Game Day was there. Led us right down the field. We stalled out in the red zone and kicked the field goal, but the first play of the game, he ran a quarterback run for a first down, and then delivered a perfect slot fade to Cade Johnson, who's a really good player at the Seahawks right now, and just led us right down the field. So he's a good player. Like I said, I think they all have played. It's not, that's the nice thing. It's not like any of these guys have never taken a snap in college. They've all played quite a bit, and it's going to be an exciting battle here.
Another transfer that's kind of it was a big headline for us when Idaho got him is Paul Malala from Notre Dame. Health-wise, his injury was Achilles.
Yes, he's done both Achilles. So we got a double Achilles and a double ACL.
Okay, health-wise, how is he?
He's in good shape. I think with all these guys, we're going to have to do a good job of monitoring them and keeping them fresh. I think that'll be building the depth in our program where we need it to be will be a multi-year, process. So, I think we're going to have to do a good job with how we structure things to keep guys healthy. The way we worked out our fall camp schedule, we'll never practice more than 4 days in a row. We'll have off days built in, and some guys we may have to limit their reps a little bit to keep them healthy. There's been times I think with Paul this summer, doing sprints and stuff, has had to limit a little bit and make sure if things are feeling tight, we got to trust those guys and listen to their body and listen to our training staff with doing that. But I think he's going to help us. I like to defensively. I like to play a lot of guys because I think you can play harder and keeps guys fresher that way. And I think we're going to have a good. I think we're going to have pretty good depth on defense. I think we'll have some guys we can play where we're not going to be, an iron 11 who never come off the field. I think we'll be able to play guys and keep guys fresh and play really hard on defense.
So since the spring ended, you guys added Caleb Heim. Is that his last name?
Yes.
Okay. As strength and conditioning coach, as well as Jack Renzel.
He's the assistant.
Yeah. So in bringing Caleb and Jack, I know Caleb's background, he'd been at South Dakota, correct? What does he add to the coaching staff?
Well, I think going back to South Dakota, they beat us the last 2 times we played them at South Dakota State, and they were beating us on recruits a lot. So it was, they were taking guys and developing guys who weren't really heavily recruited in the conference, and they were becoming really good players, and they played really hard and were strong. Coach Ball from Northern Arizona was talking to me about that. They went out and played them last year and just how big that team was and how physical they were, and I think they beat the heck out of Northern Arizona last year. So I like that. I want to be a great developmental program, and then I also want to have great energy in there. I think your morale of your team is so important. And you want guys to be excited every day to go in the weight room and feel like they're getting better every day that they're in there. And I think he's done a great job with that this summer of motivating our guys and having them ready to go every day. And again, it's another thing where I think his the effects of him will really be a process over a few years, but I think we're off to a great start and very happy with how the first summer's gone.
Since the spring and
one piece I have to add, guys, and we're going to jump right back to the video. In a minute or two, you're going to hear Jason Eck sound like he is talking to someone who is not me. And the reason he sounds that way is because he is talking to someone who's not me. There's a little back and forth between Eastern Washington was the table just to the left of University of Idaho. So there's a little bit of banter between Jason Eck and Eastern Washington head coach Aaron Best.
are there any transfers or how many transfers have you guys picked up since the spring season ended that'll be playing for 2022?
Jabori's in the mix. Paul Moala, Giuliano Falanico from USC is doing a really good job. Contributing. He's big. He's 245 and will play defensive end for us. Mervyn Kenyon from San Francisco City College, I think is a really nice player. I think he's really going to help us at safety. I think he'll be a guy who can, push Matthias at free safety and also, give us some flexibility with some nickel packages. And Coach Arwich always had a really good third down package at South Dakota. And we didn't get too much into that in the spring with sub packages, but I like that. I think it's good to have some good sub packages that way. So those are really the main guys we've added. And the big thing we wanted to do is we wanted to bring in guys who could be major contributors and difference makers as transfers. We kind of drew a line. We didn't want to bring in, I think it's a trap to bring in transfers to be backups and transfers for depth, because you're better off taking a high school kid that you can develop over 5 years that way. So we drew a line, and there were some guys that we wanted to add that we didn't get, usually losing them to FBS schools, and that's fine. We didn't want to keep going down the list and get guys who weren't good enough to go where we wanted to be. And again, I think that's going to cause us to be a little thin, like in positions like O-line this year. We're going to have to do a good job of keeping those guys healthy and developing guys. I'd still like to. We have 6 freshman O-linemen this year. I'd like to redshirt them all, and I hope we can stay healthy so we can do that. But we may have to use that 4-game rule, and play some of those guys 4 games to help our depth that way. And there's still a few guys we're keeping an eye on right now to see if we could add a guy late who, there's some guys in junior college who are taking summer classes and got to pass one more math or English class here, right down to the wire that we could add there. But, again, we didn't want to take any guys who really were Division II players just to fill a spot. We'd rather take a really big high school class, and we're off to a really good start with our 23 recruiting with a bunch of commitments so far, and I think that's going to be a big class. We want to build it mostly through high school kids. Again, I think ideally we'll be 20 to 22 high school kids in a class, and 3 to 5 transfers is really probably the sweet spot where we want to be in as we build this program.
One of our favorite listener shows, Johnny Ball Game, KTIK, you said you will not be calling plays.
Yes.
For a ton of people, that's a surprise because of your background. Could you tell us why, at this point, why do you feel that's the best one?
Well, I think as a head coach, you have to, and I really went back, the one thing I was fortunate, I wasn't always fortunate at the time because that caused me to move around a lot, but I worked for 12 assistant coaches. There's 12 head coaches during the time when I was an assistant coach from 19, my first year in coaching was 1999. So from 1999 to 2021, in those 22 years, I worked for 12 different head coaches. And, for a lot of kind of goofy situations. Nick Holt left after 2 years. Dennis was here less than a year. At Minnesota State Mankato, we had a interim coach situation. So I worked for, we had 2 great years. We had 2 seasons where we went 11-0, but it was 2 different head coaches. I worked for Rob Ashes last year when he gets let go at Montana State. Because of that, I was able to kind of take a little bit from all those guys. And just one thing when I really look back on all those guys I worked for, I felt like the guys who called plays lost a little connection. And I think in college, you have more stuff really on your plate than than like an NFL coach. You have, there's media for both, but you got to worry about, academics in college. Something you don't have to worry about at all in the NFL, and that's important, staying on top of that. Recruiting is so different. In the NFL, you have a general manager who, really handles your recruiting. That's something that's not on your plate. So I think it's a little easier at that level, to call plays and be active that way, where I think in college it's so important to have the whole team energized and the whole team, playing for you. And if you, to really do a good job as a play caller, and you got to be at practice, you got to be with the offense the whole time. And I also think sometimes when, when you're tied into one side of the ball, if you have a bad day on offense and you're running the offense, your tone and message when you're talking to the team is negative. Hey, we had a bad practice today. Where really, I think to me the best way, the way that most people respond the best is they respond to positivity. I think it's better to, if the defense kicks the offense's butt in the practice one day, it's great to praise the defense for that, and then have the offense. So I want to get praised. We got to come back and be better the next day. So that was a big reason, and that was why it was so critical to hire Luke, because Luke was my right-hand guy who I put a lot of trust in with at South Dakota State. And I'm still going to have a lot of influence on the offense and a lot of design in the game plan. But having him focus on that full time, I think will allow me to have more of an impact on defense and the impact on special teams. Because I always thought that even when Coach Alvarez was a delegator more as a head coach, and when we were doing our O-line drills in practice, if he'd come by and watch our O-line drills, I think the intensity picked up a little bit when the head coach was right there watching. And I want to be able to do that for the whole team and go, be around the defense, be around the special teams, and have an impact that way. So that's, I just think it gives us our best success. And another thing in the NFL, you're dealing with one booster, the owner. In college, there's a lot of boosters. You have to spend time with that. And I think raising money is such a critical thing in college athletics right now to fund what you need with nutrition. So I just think it's the best use of our resources. And again, just like I think President Green and Terry Golick have hired me to do a job, and they're not micromanaging me and what I want to do. I want to do that with our assistants as well, and let them grow and go. So,
in terms of style of play, is there any college or NFL? Don't care. Is there any team you are hoping Idaho stylistically looks like? That'd be a good comparison. Recent or past?
When you look at how we built our staff, and this is not one of those common knowledge saying like an NFL team, but I'd like to do a lot of what we did like at South Dakota State offensively, which we did a great job of tailoring our scheme to our players. When we had great pass catchers, and we threw it more. When we had great backs, we ran it a little bit more. I really liked what Coach Arwich did at South Dakota, which is why I hired him to be the defensive coordinator, because I thought he did a great job of taking some guys who had maybe one FCS offer and made those guys all conference players on defense, and had enough flexibility to do that. So really that's again, I know people, probably a lot of our fans probably don't know a lot of what South Dakota's defense looked like, or South Dakota State's. That probably doesn't help them. Offensively, we do like to motion a lot. We like to have a lot of pre-snap movement to try to screw up guys on defense. Some of the teams in the NFL who do that a lot would be like the 49ers and the Rams. On defense, we do, one thing I really liked about Coach Arwich's package was his, sim pressures on third down, where you blitz, but you're only rushing four guys. You're dropping some guys out. I think Georgia does a really good job with that. We try to put it more in the terms of the things people have watched. But I always thought that was a tough thing going against their defense. When I was at South Dakota State, is sometimes they'd blitz and they'd eat up your back, and your back would have to block one of those four rushers, but they were playing zone coverage behind. So now your back's eaten up. He doesn't get out on a route. You have four receivers out there, but they have seven guys on coverage. So if they have seven guys in coverage and we only have four receivers getting out, really they can double cover three of your receivers, and you got one-on-one. And it's tough sometimes for the college quarterbacks to find that one-on-one, where to go with the ball. So hope that answers your question.
Last question I have So if let's say Idaho makes playoffs, or whatever goals you have, let's say Idaho hits those.
Our goal would be to make the playoffs, but the biggest thing that I think we have to focus on is we got to focus on continuing to get better. And there's going to be adversity. We're probably not going to go 11-0 this year. So we got to make sure that when we have a tough loss, we're not hanging our head. We got to come back to work on Monday and get better throughout the week. And we're going to have a win where we surprise people this week. And when that happens, everyone's going to be patting us on the back and saying what a great job and that's a great win for us. But we can't listen to that. We got to come back on Monday because there'll still be a lot of things that we got to fix and we got to keep getting better at.
If Idaho reaches whatever goals those are, what are a few things that probably went right?
I think we'd stay healthy. I think particularly in the O-line, which is I think our probably. What's that? I had better hair than you. I definitely have better hair than you. That's probably the one thing. You're a little leaner than me right now. I'm a little heavier than you right now. But I got better hair. I think we got to stay healthy. I think we got to keep having a lot of guys make some jumps, and I think that's the key in FCS football. It's not it's not about winning battles and 5-star recruits in FCS football. North Dakota State's a great team. I think they'll probably beat Arizona the first game, but they didn't beat Arizona any of those kids in recruiting. They didn't beat those weren't kids who were turning down Pac-12 offers to go there or Big Ten offers, but they got them a lot better. They kept improving. So I think we'd have to improve a lot. I think we'll have to do a great job of protecting the football, not beating ourselves. I think that's something that good teams do. They make yourself tough to beat. You don't have a lot of foolish pre-snap penalties. You don't turn the ball over. You don't give up big plays. You make teams earn it and really play well to beat you. And again, I think staying healthy and having a little luck that way is important along the way as well. And we'll have to, we're going to have to win a game that you're an underdog. You got to, between the two Power 5 games and then, playing at Montana will be a tough game, or we'll be an underdog playing at Sac State, who was 8-0 in the league next year. I mean, you got to find a way to win one of those games that people probably think on paper right now that you don't have a shot to win. And, belief, having guys believe in themselves and, having them confident is important to do that.
Okay, actual last question. With the news around realignment that obviously hasn't impacted the Big Sky, has that trickled down into discussions with the recruits and recruits' families for the 2023 class?
It really hasn't. It really hasn't too much. I think you joke around with it a little bit. The guys on Twitter who follow FCS football, talk about that. The Kibby Dome needs to be back in the Pac-12, and some things like that, which is fun and funny. But I think we have great leadership in this conference, and Tom Wistersill I think has a great vision for where it is, and I think he told us as head coaches, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. There's going to be some programs that are separating, probably the top, whether it's 20 teams or 40 teams or 60 teams that are going to kind of be different than everybody else. I think FCS is a pretty good place to be. I think the group of 5 schools is really, there's a little question. Are they going to be able to try to go with those teams and move up, or are they going to be kind of left behind by that? So I think FCS football, one thing I really like about it is I think it's much more truer to what college sports were meant to be when college sports started 100 years ago, where now I think the Power 5 level is totally, every decision is just based on money. And I think our level is really good with, you'll have opportunities and guys like, Cooper Kupp or, Jared Allen and some of those guys who can become great pros. But, for a majority of our roster, I hope that we can get to the point where we have 5 or 6 guys getting opportunities in the NFL, but it's always going to be a vast majority of our players are not going to be pros. So hopefully we're helping develop them for life, so they go off and have a great career and are better husbands and better fathers. And it's a life-changing opportunity, getting a degree from the University of Idaho. And I think that's part of our emphasis on recruiting the Northwest. We want to do a great job with that, because I think the Idaho degree, is a powerful thing. I think, a guy comes here, has a great career, ends up with the Big Sky Conference championship ring. He's going to have a lot of options, especially if he would live down like in that Treasure Valley. That could be something for the next 40 years of his life. Could have a huge impact, and the connections he made, and the Vandals are such a strong and prideful alumni base that they want to help other Vandals and look out for those guys. So that's something that we've really tried to use and emphasize to our recruits, is that that's a great connection. Now, that helps a lot more. If you're recruiting guys from Florida, they're probably not thinking that they want to live in Boise the rest of their life or something. So I think that's a much better selling point to a kid in the Northwest than it is to kids who are from far away. So that's a big reason. And, again, if you look at the best teams in FCS football, a lot of them are getting most of their players, from neighboring states or their home state. And, North Dakota State didn't go to California to get Trey Lance. They got him from Minnesota, a bordering state. And that's what we're trying to build.
All right. Thanks for your time.
No problem, Russ.
And
Appreciate all your coverage.
We're going to get to reaction in a second, but Around the Bar brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Venture into the largest protected wilderness in the continental U.S., located right here in the great state of Idaho. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. And you can even check out special trips like the one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, run amazing whitewater. I said that twice. Taking the history along the river and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring your clothes. Let HRE handle the rest. Hughes River Expedition has been Vandal owned and operated since 1976 and ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. What are you waiting for? Find out what it's like to grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Yes, I got lost in the text there. So, look, Marten is still a producer. Dallas, you have been on the shelf for a while. Throw it to you. Take this wherever you want, man. Jason Eck talked about a ton of stuff.
I mean, I'm going to just go right into the middle of the interview. The answer about why he's not calling plays is so refreshing to me, and I don't mean to bring up the issues that we may or may not have had with the previous regime of Idaho football, but one of the common complaints that we have heard, that we don't put people's names out there, but a lot of the complaints that we've heard is Paul was so focused on what he was trying to do as the play caller that he would let other things just slip and not make those connections with kids. And to hear that Eck is doing the exact opposite and is giving up play calling, as he has obviously proven he's very, very good at it. He's going to give that up because he knows that to be a head coach the way he wants to be a head coach, he needs to be more involved everywhere rather than just calling plays. I love that. I am so excited about Vandal football. I cannot wait for the first game. Like, I know it's going to be hard to temper expectations a little bit. Expectations a little bit. Because, again, new guy, bringing in new players, we're going to have to give him a couple of years to kind of rebuild from where we are and see where the program goes. But the guy is winning everything he can right now. Like, obviously, we have to see that actual football happen. But the answers he gives to these types of questions are so well thought out and so thorough, and there's such good reasoning behind the things he says. I could not be more happy about that, Brian.
Yeah, I'm going to pull the curtain back on me for a second. To pay rent, I'm a teacher. And what Jason Eck described as part of what he wants to be able to do and what he is doing and what we've had people tell us is happening in practice is if he's the offensive coach and the offense isn't doing well, the natural reaction is to get on the offense to get better, which that's full disclosure. We were told that's what Paul did. When we say Paul, if you're a new listener, it's Paul Petrino, former University of Idaho head coach. What Jason Eck's describing is actually pretty sound educational theory in terms of trying to create energy and a positive atmosphere by creating the incentive people are looking for would be praise there. So he's showing that, hey, the way you get praise is you do the right thing, you kick ass. Whereas the incentive structure and what we're told Paul Petrino did, the incentive was to avoid something negative, which is, those are two very different things in terms of building a type of culture. And That's where I'm going to pivot to Caleb Heim, new strength and conditioning coach. One of the reasons we were told Caleb Heim was picked out of South Dakota was the energy he has, both interpersonally and just with how he orients himself with teams as a whole, is that kind of in your face, holding the line, but in a positive kind of way to get people pumped up, not to create the incentive structure of avoiding critique, to create the incentive structure of being praised for doing the right thing, but it's an aggressive type of praise. That's one of two things I think are great that are coming out of Jason Eck that I think everyone should be stoked about that. I'm going to pivot now and throw it to Dallas. There is some news that he talked about for us to look at. Now, this is speculation, us, kind of parsing his words. Jason Eck talked about not bringing in transfers to not start, which doesn't mean they get the starting job just because they're a transfer, but shifting to the quarterback thing. If what he is saying about Jabari Gibbs is correct, and Jabari Gibbs is healthy and he's going to be fine, and Jason Eck on our show now and on Johnny Ballgame's show has said he doesn't want to do the Paul thing where people are wondering who the starting quarterback is 4 weeks into the season. He wants this done in 2 weeks, 2 weeks is a time frame I just made up. He wants it done quickly. He does not want to have necessarily equitable reps for a month and a half between three guys. He wants a guy picked pretty quick. Again, speculation. That makes it sound like if Jabari Gibbs is healthy, the fan, if you're making your power ranking of who to expect, I'd say that the safest gamble right now would be to gamble on Jabari Gibbs as a starting quarterback.
I couldn't agree more. Obviously, he had nice things to say about CJ there, about being the best athlete in the room. We've obviously spoken very highly about what we think of CJ and his potential here, but it does I don't think Gibbs is going to be given the job. I don't think Eck is that kind of coach, but it definitely is. If you're going to bet on somebody, at this point, it sounds like bet on Gibbs because he is going to get a shot here. And like he said, the guys that are transferring in here, Paul Moala, Giuliano Falanico, I think I said that right. Falanico. Bingo. See, I was close enough. They're bringing in guys to play. They're not bringing them in to just fill roster spots. Like now, if CJ comes out there, or Gio, or Ridge Dutchakal, or I don't know, Nathan Cisco comes back. If somebody comes and wins this job, obviously Gibbs is a great person to have in the room, helping just make that room better with the experience he has. I know he's missed so much of his career with injuries, but there is reason to have Gibbs, even if he does not start or does not even play. However, it certainly does kind of line up like he's maybe not the leader in the clubhouse, but he's the one to keep the eye on.
Right. And of course, Dallas explained the subtext of, right, like obviously you heard Jason Eck. He didn't say the starter was. He made it clear someone has to earn it. But that's what I was saying, speculating, putting pieces together of what he said. I want another piece to put together here, not just to talk about Jabari Gibbs, but just the team into the future. Jason Eck's answer to the team comparison in terms of what we're gonna see. I mean, you can't see it in that video because it's not a video. Jason Eck kind of laughed when he said, well, like South Dakota State would be the comparison in all likelihood, which I'm only bringing that up because for a long time, Jason Eck has given the answer of what the team's going to look like is, hey, we got to see what the talent's going to be. And look, we're still there in terms of nailing this down. But look, the roster is, for the most part, what's going to be for the start of the season. Now it's sorting out the hierarchy of the roster. If you're a listener who's wondering, hey, what is the strategy probably going to look like? Well, it sounds like it's going to be a hybrid of offensively South Dakota State and defensively South Dakota. And if you're a really enterprising, really motivated listener, you can hop on ESPN Plus. Both those teams are Missouri Valley Conference teams. You can watch a little bit of their games, and that sounds like strategically that's what Idaho is going to be for this upcoming season. Not exactly shocked because that's where the component parts and the coaching staff came from. But look, we've forever been trying to put the pieces together of what we might be seeing. And this is why I preface this interview by telling people, you don't even have to know what I'm asking. Jason Eck's just answering the questions. Like, this isn't speaking in tongues or something like that. He answers things directly. I think it's great to hear that probably the knee-jerk reaction of what Idaho would look like based off who we have as our coaching staff and based off the talent that we're aware of on the team, meaning that we've seen. We're going to be some version of like a South Dakota State / South Dakota schematically. That gets me excited to call Ty Graham and order my season tickets.
Absolutely. And the one thing I want to point out for anybody that doesn't particularly follow South Dakota State or the Missouri Valley, they just had 3 different quarterbacks in 3 years. They have been a good team regardless of who is playing quarterback. And that's the big thing to point out in that statement is they had Gibbs, he got hurt. Mark Gronowski, he got hurt. They brought in Chris Oladokin. They have had guys go in. Oladokin is in the NFL now out of just 1 year at SDSU when he transferred in. Like, this is going to be a team build that is not 100% focused on the quarterback. And that's awesome. I mean, obviously the quarterback is the guy that touches the ball every play. Well, I mean, you have the Wildcat, but realistically, every offensive play, the quarterback is going to touch the ball. He's the most important player. However, this is a team that is going to get built around things other than the quarterback. And that's what's exciting to see. He talked about the motion. He talked about like doing things that make quarterbacks' lives easier rather than just putting it all on the quarterback's arm and hoping he goes out there and scores 30.
Yeah, another piece to take away, Dallas, is when, and this is one of the concerns Idaho's going to have, and it's not exactly a shock, but Jason Eck referenced it, is offensive line depth. There's still a couple guys who may be added between now and August. It's August 4th or August 2nd. The practice starts. I'd have to look at a calendar. But we in the spring, we did see, hey, quarterback and offensive line needed to look better. It was hard to completely separate how much of this is the team being new, how much of this is the offensive line had multiple quarterbacks they're playing with, not just one to get used to. How much of this was how can a quarterback get relaxed when the offensive line is struggling? It was very difficult to know which of those things you would rank as like the biggest issue and which was a complementary issue. But looks like something we've brought up multiple times, Dallas, in previous episodes is offensive line. This next season is going to how the offensive line performs is probably going to dictate a lot of how this team actually is. But looking into the future, this is probably one of the position groups to expect within 2 or 3 seasons the most growth, which is something Eck's talked about it. That look, the guys North Dakota State has, they're not starting as freshmen. They have a good strength and conditioning program they build. The guys he got at South Dakota State, they weren't starting. They weren't all FCS level or FBS transfer level guys after 1 year. It just takes time. And that is one of the things that we're very close to that tempering expectations discussion at some point for the actual season. But offensive line is going to have probably a gigantic footprint on how Idaho actually sorts itself. We're going to talk about preseason polls in a second. Dallas, any other points that Jason Eck brought up that you want to go over?
I have a handful of things I could go over, but I know that we're pretty deep into this already. We've already talked about the stylistically resemble stuff. We've talked about the him not calling plays. I thought it was very interesting that the goal was let's try to make the playoffs. Like I loved that. Like, have the confidence that this is a team that can do that. Obviously, as he mentioned, you're not going to go undefeated, but let's have some optimism. Let's have some hope, because I think he knows at the end of the day, yes, his job is to win football games, but he was also hired to bring interest back to this program. We saw the Kibbe Dome last year, how empty it was. We saw how nobody cares about Idaho. I don't think it feels like the spokesman's not even going to have a writer this year. Like, Idaho coverage is dripping away, not to toot our own horns, but we're some of the only coverage left for Vandal football or Vandal sports in general. I think the way I read into that was Eck just knows he's got to put a positive face out there. He can't come out here and say, like, yeah, the offensive line and the quarterback situation, we're going to maybe win 4 games and hopefully we'll be better in a couple years with all of the freshmen that we've brought in. But the framing of this is just, it's miles different having a coach that understands the PR aspect of media days. Like, that none of this is for like the rest of the coaches to learn about each other. This is for the media and getting people a little bit of excitement about, hey, football's back, new season, new faces, new coaches, new game plans. Like, that's what we're here for. I don't know. I just can't speak highly about that enough because it's been so long since we've had that. I know we went from Akey, the most charismatic coach in the history of football, to the least charismatic coach in the history of football. And now we're back on the upswing again with a guy who understands you have to get people excited about the program. Like, yes, if you start winning a ton of games, people will buy in, but you have to find ways to engage the fan base. And I can't talk about how exciting that is enough.
Yeah, look, the other this is something that I think a lot of guys who listen to our show have thought of, which is, Jason Eck coming across as a breath of fresh air. Look, you guys just listened to 20 minutes. He was direct. By the way, media day, there's a lot of people there, and he was fine to go 20 minutes with the podcast. Which, look, we do work pretty hard to make sure that this adds value. But I mean, keep in mind, like when I'm at media day, there's a lot of people who pay rent based off being journalists. They have a lot more background. I mean, Eck, and increasingly, at least with football, University of Idaho are fine to keep themselves available for stuff like this, stuff like us. So, yeah, I mean, I'm with you on all that. I will just, as a little asterisk, I stopped asking coaches directly what their goal is because no one ever says anything but playoffs. And another thing, I don't ask for characteristics of teams because everyone always says they want their team to be tough. I am still waiting to hear the coach say, like, I hope that we have solid tensile strength, but nice finesse. That's just not how people talk of these things.
That's sort of how Mike Leach talks if you ask him. That is pretty close to Leach, but that dude's also so far out into right field. But your point remains.
Yeah, but your last thing, Jason Eck talked about, FCS as a whole, and look, that was a theme at media day, not just from Jason Eck, not just from journalists, from the head of the conference, Commissioner Tom Listersill. As far as realignment, the FCS is at the mercy of other steps that take place first. Also, Tom Listersill was open about fellow conference commissioners describing FBS as it's just about money. It's essentially two conferences working together with two cable channels who have a lot of money, and whatever's left over after those guys figure out what they want to do, that's when it's going to start to impact levels like Idaho. But for now, Idaho is in a conference that, never mind the whole bowl game thing, there's only like 4 teams, even with an expanded playoff. There's realistically at the FBS level, there's 6 teams that have a prayer at even competing for a national championship. Well, Idaho's not in that. If the NIL thing is distasteful to you based off how NIL operates at the top of college football, well, NIL in the big sky is probably what most people wanted it to be, which is local companies hooking up with athletes where like they get paid some or they get some sort of benefit, but it mostly just makes their life a little bit easier. It's not in your face. Jason Eck has always been open about the FCS feeling more pure. And I got to tell you, man, I completely buy when he describes it that way. I'm ready to shift to the poll, Dallas. Unless we want to bring Marten in. Well, I do want to bring Marten in. So is Marten listening? Marten, any takeaways you have from the interview before we shift to the media and coaches polls?
It, just speaking from a fan perspective, it's gotten me fired up already. It's still late July and I want to buy season tickets again, but I already renewed them, kind of deal.
Okay, well, you heard it from Marten. That actually does bring up one last thing that I want to go over, Dallas, that relates to a point you made about Idaho coverage. So we know Stephen Wiebe from Lewiston Tribune is no longer covering University of Idaho football. There isn't a defined guy for U of I football at this point. Taryn Kowalsk, I said his last name. He's a University of Idaho alum. We can get his handle up in a second. He was there for media day. And by the way, he was doing good work. He spent a lot of time with Jason Eck. Real friendly dude. Give him a shot. Follow him on Twitter. Check out stuff with the Lewiston Tribune. But Dallas, you brought up increasingly Idaho. There isn't the same kind of continuity. Like Colton Clark covered University of Idaho football for a while, had a lot of time to build sources. And we in the chat we have Taryn's Twitter handle. It's now as a Chiron or Cryon at TK Seahawk 13 on Twitter. Follow him for his University of Idaho coverage if he keeps doing it. But look, Eastern Washington's in the same boat as Idaho. They don't have a full-time beat reporter at the Spokesman Review. This is just the way things are changing. If you guys like what we're doing, help us out. #OnlyTubs. Go to patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. Helps out. If you just want to do one-time donation, you don't care about doing the Patreon thing, just reach out to us on Twitter. We'll get it arranged. Dallas, the preseason polls. I'm just going to throw it to you.
You looking for hot takes? You looking for me to read this off for our listeners? How do we want to approach this first?
I'll set the table and let you react to it. So that's producing in public, guys. So Big Sky preseason polls, both coaches and media. Just to run through the list, University of Montana was number one in both the coaches and the media poll. There weren't that many differences between both polls, but I'm going to run through them 1 to 12 each. Coaches poll, number 1, Montana, 2, Sacramento State, 3, Montana State, 4, Weber State, 5, UC Davis, 6, Eastern Washington, 7, Northern Arizona, 8, Idaho, 9, top 5, Portland State, 10, Cal Poly, tied for 11th, Idaho State and Northern Colorado. Look at the media side. Montana, like I said, first, Montana State in second, Sacramento State third, Weber fourth, UC Davis fifth, Eastern sixth, NAU seventh, top 5, Portland State 8, Idaho 9, then 10, Cal Poly, 11, Northern Colorado, 12, Idaho State. So Dallas, your reaction first. Let's go just look at the whole conference as a whole first. We'll talk about the Idaho part second.
I think conference as a whole, nobody has any idea what the hell is going to happen. I think that's what this poll says. If you look at the first place votes, Montana actually in the coaches poll, Montana had the least amount of first place votes, but yet still finished first with 1 point over Sacramento State, who is 1 point over Montana State. Montana had 3 first place votes. Sacramento State had 4. Montana State had 5. So the coaches have no idea what to expect here. Media poll shaped out kind of the same. Montana got 14 firsts, Montana State 13, Sacramento State 4, and UC Davis actually had 1. In a conference where you can reasonably expect the first 4-5 teams to have playoff aspirations going into the last weekend of the season, maybe all 5 of them even get in. Looking at Montana, Montana State, Sac State, Weber State, UC Davis, that seems right. I don't see Weber State and UC Davis moving up into the top 3. I do see them kind of being in that 4 or 5 range, but this fits pretty accurately with what you'd expect. The Montana schools are just always going to be good, and Sac State has won the conference twice. Like it fits, it feels right. It's kind of strange to see Cal Poly climbing the ranks a little bit, but it also shows how poorly Ed McCaffrey has handled Northern Colorado, and Idaho State has other issues at the moment. Anybody know what's going on with Devontae Neal yet?
That Devontae Neal is the guy who was charged first-degree murder, correct?
Yes, that is.
Yeah, well, I know he's not coaching at Idaho State. So conference-wise, look, there's been a lot of turnover in some of the big names in the conference who've kind of been conference stars for the last couple of years. For example, I think a ton of teams are still not clear at all on what their quarterback picture is going to be. Idaho is just one of them. But it's the part that I will say is clear perception-wise. Montana State, Sacramento State should be understood before we actually see anyone play as the class of the conference. And after that, even though the media and coaches polls are pretty dang close for the most part, like both have the exact same top 7 teams in their top 7 with just minor shifts. I do think once you get out of the top 3, it is a lot of like people have no idea how to parse who they're going to put. So I'd say spots 4 through 8 are pretty damn up for grabs and could have a ton of movement, which doesn't mean that one of those teams wouldn't move into the top 3. But like look, Montana State, Sacramento State's a completely defensible top 3 in whatever order you do. Shifting now to Idaho, Dallas, Idaho, 8 in coaches poll, 9 in media. What was your first reaction?
So just for the listeners who don't have the ability to see this. So in the coaches poll, Idaho ranked above Portland State, Cal Poly, Idaho State, and Northern Colorado. In the media poll, Portland State was above Idaho, Cal Poly, Northern Colorado, Idaho State below. And I think that's very fitting of a preseason poll. That's exactly where I had Idaho in my poll, is that 8-9 range. I don't see until they can beat Northern Arizona in the Dome again after that awful game last year. I just don't see any reason to put them above Northern Arizona at the moment. Eastern, yes, I know Eastern just lost to Eric Barrier, but you just can't do it with a guy, his first head coaching job. No one knows what's going to happen at the quarterback. You can't put him that high, at least to me. And then you're looking at the maybe not has-beens, maybe more like never haves. Cal Poly, NoCo, and Idaho State. I think it's pretty brain dead to be able to say Idaho is probably better than those teams just on talent alone. So naturally, they're going to probably be ahead of them in a preseason poll. I don't see any problem with this. I think about the highest I would have probably gone with Idaho is maybe 7. Being right around that Portland State area, top 5 Portland State, that's pretty accurate to me.
For me, my takeaway, which I'm going to save going over, I'd put Idaho for our future episodes, but suffice it to say, I would not have put Idaho as 9 or 8. Look, if you're following Idaho, you're saturated for good reason with good Idaho news, because Jason Eck's doing everything you could hope he's doing right now. We're getting some big recruits. Well, there's culturally seems like the shift is good. But if you're a Big Sky coach, or if you're a Big Sky media member who's not paying attention to Tubbs at the club all the time, well, what you've seen out of Idaho and the Big Sky is essentially the exact same team every season for 2018, 2019, spring 2021, and then fall 2021, which was talented but underachieving, meaning that's nearly half a decade of that output. If you're not enmeshed in what's going on with Idaho, you probably should have a wait and see approach. If you're not enmeshed in what's going on with Idaho, you should probably give Aaron Best the benefit of the doubt of being able to bring guys in to take over for some of the super COVID seniors like Eric Barrier and Talolo Limu-Jones, who were huge in terms of their impact on Eastern. They're not there anymore. But again, a guy like Aaron Best has only been good to okay as a head coach. We all love Jason Eck. He hasn't coached a game. So I was both a little shocked because I view Idaho in a much more favorable light to some of the teams above Idaho. So part of me was annoyed, shocked, whatever. But another part of me, like I just explained, was, okay, well, until Idaho turns this into actual wins, if you're not following closely, there's probably no reason to move Idaho up. So I guess, Dallas, before we pivot out, do you feel – you've already said in some way this seems reasonable for Idaho, but do you feel like these polls were at all disrespectful towards Idaho Jason Eck, what we've seen since he's been brought on?
I really don't and I know that I'm the negative Nancy over here, but I really don't. I voted in these polls before I was part of Tubbs because of the whole journalism thing. So the way I look at it is, I think your top 5 is pretty established. The Montanas, Sac State, Weber State, UC Davis. I think those are a pretty solid top 5. And then as you go down the list, Eastern, I think, gets the benefit of the doubt. Who knows what Gunnar Talkington or whatever other quarterback they're just going to find walking onto the field one day. Who knows what's going to happen there? And then you have NAU. They're working through a bunch of issues with their quarterbacks last year. A little bit more experience makes sense to have them above Idaho. If you look at Idaho from the standpoint that the media is going to, you see, okay, new head coach. He comes from a great program, but last year Idaho trotted out a whole bunch of quarterbacks and nobody put up incredible numbers. There's nothing here on this team that says Idaho's building. It's oh no, they just lost Trey Walker. They just lost one of the best players in recent Big Sky history. This feels right when you approach it from that standpoint. Obviously, for those that are a little bit more dialed in and we see the energy around the program and the change in coaching, especially on the defensive side of the ball, I think that Idaho will finish higher than 8th or 9th, but going into it as a preseason poll, it honestly, it lines up exactly perfect for me.
I think there's a couple of spots that are disrespectful. Mostly like the overall area. If you view the conference as tiers, Idaho's probably at the bottom of what you might call the second tier based off these polls. Because I don't think people understand Idaho as being close to Cal Poly, Idaho State, Northern Colorado. I gotta say, man, Portland State getting the benefit of the doubt. They just graduated like their second best quarterback in program history, and they sucked. Idaho looked great in the first half against Portland State last season, then tried very hard to lose. But Portland State, I don't think that's defensible, putting Portland State above Idaho. I also, maybe I'm a little more down on NAU. They were 4-8 in Chris Ball's first season. 5-6 the next season. I don't think there's that much difference between the two. Like that is a minor upswing, but the winning percentage is better just because if NAU had an extra game in 2021, they probably would have lost in terms of what they schedule out of conference. So I think I guess that's what was shocking to me, was seeing Portland State and NAU right around there. And both NAU above Idaho in both. So I guess that's the part that I find disrespectful. I already went over the other 6 of Montana, Sac State, Montana State, Weber State, UC Davis, Eastern in some order. You can make a case of why you would put any of those guys over Idaho before we've seen a game out of Jason Eck. But I mean, I don't think it's going to be possible for Eck to be worse than Paul Petrino, and Paul Petrino had us right around better than Portland State and right around NAU anyway. So just by any improvement whatsoever should put Idaho above those. But that's I guess that's the part that I found disrespectful. I'm also sure with how Jason Eck uses motivation. Look, I know it happens every single year with coaches' media polls. Whoever feels like they're disrespected, that's used as bulletin board material. It happens every year because it works. So I would in no way say, oh, it's probably fine. It's probably not going to hurt Idaho overall to be where they're at, because I bet, the last few seasons with Paul, look, Alex Boatman talked about it. Guys not being able to get up for Big Sky games, which is that's a Paul Petrino problem. That's those guys on the team problem. I don't think this year's team is going to have that problem. Just eliminate that from the last couple seasons and you have a couple extra wins.
I completely agree. I guess I'm looking at it from the 30,000 foot view of, you have NAU returning much of the same guys. You'd think that they'd make a jump. They were pretty young. They still have a couple all conference talent out there. Portland State, for whatever reason, people love Barnum. I think the dude's hilarious. I would love him as an Idaho assistant. As a head coach, I don't think he's much, but I can see where I can see the idea of, okay, NAU didn't just fire their coach. They did beat Idaho last year. Portland State probably should have beat Idaho last year. Honestly, that second half of that game was so embarrassingly bad. I can understand where you look at Idaho and say, well, they fired their coach. They don't have an answer at quarterback. You rank them low. Like, I get it. I'm not going to get upset or offended by it. I think Idaho will finish higher than this, but as a preseason poll, I can understand NAU and Portland State both being ahead of Idaho, and it sucks, but that's where we are. It's not like Idaho's out there consistently punching with the UC Davises and Weber States of the world. They're in bloodbath fights with NAU and Portland State, and that's just where the end of the Petrino tenure is. Hopefully Eck turns all of this around immediately, and next year we're talking about, should Idaho be in the top 3 consideration? Hopefully that's where we're at, but right now, if you're not dialed into what Eck is doing with the program, I can understand people looking at Idaho and thinking they're just going to be another bottom half team again.
I guess the way that I react is I am so fatigued with media and coaches in the Big Sky. And look, I mostly like media and coaches in the Big Sky. This is a narrow thing I'm frustrated with. How people haven't given up on Portland State is just preposterous at this point. Like, Bruce Barnum, clearly not a good coach. Portland State clearly cannot capitalize on the talent within the city of Portland, even compared to other Big Sky schools. Portland State can't capitalize on that. I know I really believe that if Portland State were in a city that was not Portland, they would be understood this coming season as similar to Cal Poly, except Cal Poly trending up, Portland State trending down. We already covered some of it. Portland State lost some of the best talent they've had in a long time, and they still were no good, or were not good last season. No way that Bruce Barnum has the turnaround there. Plus, we had Matt Brown on the show earlier this year. Portland State doesn't commit what they need to institutionally, so they're going to continue to have, like, they're not going to get rid of Bruce Barnum until his contract expires. It's going to be like Idaho with Zach Kloss this year. I just think Portland State should be understood as trending clearly down, and I don't need to talk about it. And Northern Arizona, I'm just not sold. I watched Idaho lose to Northern Arizona a couple times over the last couple of years, just coming away incredibly unimpressed with Northern Arizona and just baffled at how Idaho found a way to lose those games. But it was not a shock at the time. But again, I don't look at NAU as this program clearly on the rise. They look like, okay, well, they're not the worst in the league, but they're not. Again, I don't see NAU on the schedule and think, oh my God, Dallas, how are we going to handle Northern Arizona this year?
I mean, I thought that last year. I don't necessarily think that this year. I think that, but this is a whole nother conversation that we will get into in future episodes. But as far as Idaho preview, I think there's a whole lot of optimism to be had in the fact that I don't think there's going to be other coaches laughing at how terrible our coach is anymore. And I'll leave it at that. I think that we're not going to have the problems that we've had the last 4 years.
Which gives us last point for us to go over now is preseason Big Sky teams. And the reason I say last for now, we're just going to end the episode at some point. There's actually a ton of stuff that Tom Listersill brought up at Media Days that we'll probably get to. Actually, there's one more we'll get to after this. But all conference team, look, it's listed up on the screen for viewers. If you're a listener, you're just going to have to look this up. I'm not going to read the entire all conference team, but Idaho has one member on the Big Sky preseason all conference team. It's on defensive side of the ball. Favai inside linebacker was voted to the all Big Sky team. Jason Eck has named him a captain. Jason Eck and Rob Larich on our shows have talked about how he has been clearly a leader on the defensive side of the ball. So seeing that name on the list, a little bit of a surprise when you look at the preseason poll of Idaho not being thought of as great. And Favai was good for Idaho last year, but he was certainly overshadowed by Trey Walker. Dallas, you look at this Big Sky all conference team overall, any surprises in your mind?
Not really. I mean, the quarterback situation is just kind of unsettled across the conference still. So touchdown Tommy, as the Montana State folks like to coin him, makes sense as the all conference QB. Obviously, I think that they got the running backs correctly. Wide receiver, it's a bummer that Hayden Hatton didn't make it, but obviously you can't go off of a guy's historical output. You have to go from the previous season. And I don't see anything in here that screams completely wrong, especially when it comes to Idaho. I don't see anybody on here. There's a couple guys I could make an argument for that might be on the team at the end of the season, but I don't see anything in here that's terribly weird. I mean, Robbie Hauk makes it to this every year, and that's about the one head scratcher to me. I feel like there's other safeties that could make it in over him, but you look across at Anthony Adams, I would argue is the best corner in the conference. I think Morgan Best is probably the best safety in the conference. Like, it feels like a lot of these names have been on the lists before. I don't see anything that's terribly crazy. Cap Dan jumping in and saying Terez will be in the conversation at the end of the year. I absolutely can see that. Like, honestly, I can see Zach Borish getting on at either receiver or running back, or I don't know what they'd put him on. There's enough guys that there's shots for some Vandals to make it at the end, but I can see why right now Favai is the only one. It makes sense.
So to take things in kind of reverse order, Dallas, the place that Zach Borish can make based off the positions right now are its athlete. Asher O'Hara, quarterback from Sacramento State, is listed. Just the acronym's AP. That's just athlete, because Asher O'Hara he's kind of like a less versatile version of Zach Borish on Sacramento State, but he got more dedicated touches and wasn't running it up the middle every play last year. So that explains that for me. But just if listeners are curious, hey, how could a Slash get there? That's one of the spots as an athlete. Rest of the conference, I think quarterback, I wouldn't have voted for Tommy Mellott as quarterback. He has 2 total. Actually, that's a lie, man. He has 1 good outing as a passing quarterback. It is in the FCS semifinals against South Dakota State. He went 10 of 15 for 233 yards. Now, of course, he's a good runner. Ran for 155 yards against South Dakota State. But that was an outlier. He didn't start for most of the season, so some of this is small sample size. But in the sample size that he had, Mellott, I think people are assuming a lot of growth on behalf of Tommy Mellott right now to vote him best quarterback in conference when he has 2 total games in his career passing for more than 100 yards. Probably the best option in my mind would have been Jake Dunaway at Sacramento State. But the overall point, Dallas, you're right. Look, we're in a kind of different swing of quarterbacks in the Big Sky right now. A ton of really good guys have graduated out of the conference in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, keep in mind, 2019, Case Cookus was the third best quarterback in the conference, Dallas, in 2019. And he's an all-time Big Sky level quarterback in terms of contribution. We just have exited a really, really great era of quarterback play in Big Sky football. And now we have, I don't mean this euphemistically, I don't mean this as a put down. A lot of teams are going to have guys who are a little bit more game managers, but in a positive sense, not the euphemism of Mark Sanchez was a game manager because he sucked and people felt like they couldn't say he sucked. But there are guys who are game managers who look that you don't want them passing 50 times a game, but they can be effective moving the ball. Jake Dunaway was kind of like that for Sacramento State last year. I expect we'll have a handful of guys like that in the conference this year, but that explains why a guy like Tommy Mellott, where it seems like it's the Montana media, and he, like Cap Dan 58 said, he has a nickname with the word touchdown in it. So hard to go against that. Otherwise,
I do want to just quickly point out the stats here of the returning quarterbacks. You have Barrier gone, Davis Alexander gone, Justin Miller, thank God, is gone. Jake Dunaway had 12 touchdown passes last year. RJ Martinez at NAU had 14. Matt McKay is gone. So there really isn't a whole lot, like you said. There's not a whole lot of guys left that are putting up Cookus-like numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. So and some of the style of play, we can look at the different teams in terms of success in the conference. Montana made it to the final 8 with terrible offense last season because they're more about controlling the ball. Montana State could score better than Montana last year, but they had the same basic style. They were beating Colorado by 500, but they were not beating everyone by scores like that. Eastern Washington was kind of the outlier. Well, this season, Aaron Best has a guy who, by all accounts, Gunnar Talkington is a game manager type of guy, meaning not going to pass like Eric Barrier. And Aaron Best forever, it's not been a secret. He's wanted Eastern to run a ton more. He's an offensive line guy. This is just kind of the evolution of the conference. Last takeaway, though, that I want to go over with the teams. There's kind of a weird split in terms of talent. Montana wins both coaches and media poll. There's not a single Montana Grizzly on the first team all conference offensive roster, but they make up 33 or so % of the defensive roster. Then Montana State has 3 guys on the all-conference offensive team: Tommy Mellott, quarterback; Isaiah Fonze, running back; and RJ Fitzgerald's fullback. But only 1 on the defensive side. So I guess what I'd say is the way I would interpret these rosters, the defensive talents in this league, even though there's been turnover, as there is in college sports, but it's different on the offensive side of the ball. Defensive talent, it's a lot more known quantities. Otherwise, look, Ulonzo Gilliam was the offensive player of the year. He tried to leave UC Davis. So really, there's just a lot of unknown quantities on the offensive side of the ball. That's where it'll be fun for the upcoming season. Dallas, you've been filibustered. I'm going to filibuster you for like 10 more seconds. Just some news I have after making the rounds of media days. Big as far as broadcast this year, this is different for both Idaho and the Big Sky. All but one Idaho home game right now is going to be carried on SWX for sure, which means, and SWX is very likely going to try to nail down that last one. There's a little bit of confusion right now. The hierarchy in airing Big Sky games in terms of the rights to the broadcast itself goes ESPN first, and ESPN has a couple of primetime games for the conference. It's the Montana schools. Scripps is the second network that has the choice, but they're replacing Root Sports. Root Sports completely out of the picture, but Scripps, they're just airing the Montana State games as the games that they're going to take, which will still be available on ESPN Plus with no regional blackouts. For that leaves other entities as kind of third level to try to negotiate games. SWX has picked up all but one of the Idaho games happen because Eastern Washington and Idaho do not play home the same week as each other at all this season. So it's a little bit more effortless for the local broadcast of SWX, which is professional grade, to pick it up. Dallas, you've been filibustered. Hearing that, and also hearing that from the Vandal perspective, all you have to do to watch games now is either go to the Dome or have ESPN Plus. The end. Nothing else. Don't have to worry about VPNs. Don't have to worry about extra logins. Just ESPN Plus or tickets. Dallas, your reaction to media news?
My reaction is ESPN Plus is the best goddamn thing to happen to this conference in a long time. And I could not argue that more. It is so nice to just know that all I have to do is open up ESPN Plus and I can watch every single Vandal game. I don't have to worry about shit. They're on Root Sports this weekend. I don't have cable. I don't want to go to a bar and watch the game in Eastern land when there's like 3 people in Spokane that are even caring about the Big Sky Conference. Like I don't want to have to deal with that, and I don't have to. You don't have to go down to the bar and say, hey, can you put up Pluto TV? You just open up ESPN Plus and boom, it's there. And it is, man, it is just so nice to know, like, we're going to be able to watch every game just in one place. You don't have to worry about trying to, you want to watch the Brawl of the Wild? Good luck. Hopefully you know somebody with Root Sports. Like, you don't have to worry about that anymore. We're moving finally into the 21st century. Let's hope that maybe the new century is going to give Idaho some wins. We're only starting 22 years late.
And if you're new to this, ESPN Plus loads the games afterward, right after the game finishes. So if you can't watch the game, or if you know you're going to miss like the first half because of work or something like that, but you want to see the whole thing, you still can. You could. That was not on the table with Pluto TV. You could upload, like, the games were uploaded a day or two later on the Big Sky channel, but the playback was nowhere near as good. So I'm going to co-sign everything Dallas said, with the addition of the FCS has they have a pregame show that was on YouTube last year called All In with Sam Herder, Craig Haley, some other guys. That is now going to be on ESPN Plus as pregame material. And the next evolutionary step in the ESPN Plus Big Sky contract is getting schools to carry, if schools don't have an SWX or some other channel doing pregame, postgame on TV, the push is going to be for schools to start having pregame, postgame live content. Now, we, of course, are one version of that, and we think we'd be better anyway. But if you're a person who's wondering how is ESPN Plus benefiting the conference, well, clearly we just talked about the playback. We already talked about the ease of use. But now, look, we're moving towards a much more professional orientation towards FCS football. Again, this partnership has been nothing short of a home run. I asked Commissioner Wistrasill if we're approaching the point of minimum standards of broadcast for schools, which is irrelevant for Idaho if SWX is carrying everything. But he said we're not quite there yet, but it's moving in that direction of, look, places are being given money, they're being given time. We're starting to push the direction we want these things to go. Minimum standards, meaning like Portland State not being able to have an awful broadcast all the time. Idaho State needing to do a little bit better. The conference isn't officially there, but we're getting pretty close. Dallas, we're at an hour and 15. I'm going to give you one last chance to bring anything up, or we're going to call it a night.
I believe in Jason Eck. That's it. That's the statement.
Okay. Well, look, I
Caught you off guard with that one, huh?
no. Well, here's the thing. I had this discussion with a couple guys in media day because of how look. If you look at the coverage we do of Idaho basketball, because Idaho basketball sucks, it should come across as antagonistic. Half the time, I feel like I'm doing something wrong coming across as a fanboy. But look, it's been good football news, and now we get better conference football news, and
we didn't just lose our biggest rivalry game because of athletic administration stupidity.
Yeah. So again, like I'm with you on believing in Jason Eck. Fingers crossed that obviously this has turned to actual wins. I believe we're going to get some. But we're going to have those games coming up. First game September 3rd. As far as our schedule, guys, we're of course going to have an all Big Sky conference preview. We're going to have an Idaho team specific preview, and then the week of the WSU game, we're going to have a preview. But that means next week, we're really close to that run of weeks starting. We're not going to record next week. We're going to message out to patrons. We're going to do our first Tubbs call just talk to people, get feedback, talk to you guys about some ideas, see how you take them. We're going to be publishing that in the Discord and getting people individually who've paid and are not yet in the Discord. If being part of that interests you, join at patreon.com/Tubbs at the club to join #OnlyTubbs, or message us directly on Twitter. You can do the Tubbs account. You can do my account. If you're a person who wants to make a one-time donation, we have ways to do that. Just get right to us. But if you're a patron, we're going to get to you about Tubbs call for the incoming week. And with that, Marten has an outro queued up. It's time to close it out. Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
This is producer Brian doing a terrible job of even finding what we're going to play us out with. So we're just going to call it good. See you guys Tuesday.